8 o'clock. Each week, we select a musical style and play 78s, 45s, and 33 RPM records. Some of our themes will include swing music, blues, heart-wrenching torch songs, early rock and roll, girl groups, soul, and R&B.
KSJE is supported by San Juan Regional Medical Center, here to meet your urgent and emergent medical needs, whether they are COVID-19 related or not. Medical emergencies happen when you least expect them. Whether it's a stroke, heart attack, illness, or injury, San Juan Regional Medical Center's caregivers are here to provide care to you and your loved ones. Find out more online at sanjuanregional.com. .41 degrees at 10 minutes past 8 o'clock. Good morning, everybody. I'm Scott Micklin. It is Wednesday, September 30th. It's good to have you along with us on KSJE. Welcome, of course, to our viewers who are watching this visual radio program, streaming live to the KSJE Facebook page, our YouTube channel, and this morning we are also streaming video live to our Twitter account as well. Also, welcome to our radio listeners who are listening on 90.9 FM in San Juan County, New Mexico, 103.3 FM in the Durango, Colorado area, and our internet listeners who are listening everywhere the web is at ksje.com. It's great to have you all with us this morning. Coming up on the program today, my conversation with Farmington Schools Superintendent Dr. Eugene Schmidt. He'll be here to talk about the Return to Learn plan for Farmington schools. The district has received approval to resume some face-to-face classes for K through 6th grade. We'll be talking about that, what that means for younger students, and the plans for older students as well. It's coming up this morning in just a few more moments right here on KSJE. Later on this hour, I'll be checking in with Dr. Mike Haddabaugh. He has more to say this week about narcissists. That's our weekly visit to the Encouragement Lab this morning at 8:50 a.m. on KSJE. Next hour, Mick Hess will take us roving with the arts, and this morning, Mick is premiering a new feature on roving with the arts every other Wednesday called Local Favorites. He is talking to a local musician about their favorite pieces of music and some other interesting questions that Mick has on his mind. This week, we'll premiere the program with the wonderful Kathy Pope as Mick's guest. That's coming up today at 9:06 on KSJE. Of course, Wednesday, it's a 90-minute version of Roving with the Arts, which takes us to 10:30, and right on Four Corners, our local and regional author program. Tracy Hales-Vast this week is talking to Teresa Doublepage about her latest book, The Queen of Bones. That conversation, you will hear that today at 10:30 on KSJE's Right on Four Corners program. Don't forget, of course, in addition to Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, you can also connect with KSJE on our Instagram page as well. And let's talk about the weather forecast. Mild temperatures, lots of sunshine for the next several days. Take a look. Sunny and 81 for a high in Farmington today. Clear and 41 overnight. It'll be 82 tomorrow, sunshine, and 80 on Friday. Partly sunny skies on Saturday with a high of 79. 79 again on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, and 80s into the middle of next week with overnight lows mostly in the lower 40s. Joining me this morning for our monthly get-together, the Superintendent of Schools for the Farmington Municipal School District, Dr. Eugene Schmidt, is here via Zoom. Dr. Schmidt, good morning.
Good morning, Scott, and good morning to our listeners.
It's good to see you and have you with us. I know things have been happening pretty fast and furious between Farmington and Santa Fe, but you have kind of gotten some latest instructions from the Public Education Department, and maybe we'll start there by letting our viewers and listeners know kind of what's next for Farmington schools.
Yes, and so I appreciate that. And for those people who are viewing the stream, I wanted to again give a shout out to our schools because we collect accolades and things along the way. And so just as a reminder, I wanted to We have posted a Blue Ribbon National School, and that was Ladera, and we're also one of America's best communities, and there are other kinds of things. More recently, Piedra Vista was notified that it had received at least an honorable mention from the U.S. News and World Reports for, a quality school in New Mexico. So I just wanted to kind of give a shout out to some of my schools. Some years ago, I think we did a broadcast in Northeast, was a national Title I school. So just wanted to kind of give a shout out to my schools before we jump into why at-school learning is so important.
Fair enough. I'm glad that you did that because that's an important recognition. So thank you for doing that, Dr. Schmidt.
So let me jump into the story that I think we prefer to talk about, and that's we have had the approval of the Public Education Department to reopen pre-K through 5 on October 13th. It's been a long time since kids have been in school, dating all the way back to about March 13th.
Right.
And so we're really excited to bring about 2,100 kids back. So the process, the community I know was anxious to get kids back in school. We've been just almost daily, seem like weekly, contacting the Public Education Department to say, what does it take? And if I can take our listeners back to September 3rd, we actually did have the approval to open for our pre-K 5, but the guidelines changed, Scott, at the last minute. If people could understand room capacity versus teacher roster.
Right.
And so the original public education guideline is you had to do social distance, but it was based upon how many kids you could get in the room at 50% capacity. And so we had a plan approved. We're all good to go. It's going to bring back 2,100 kids or more. And then we got a call from the secretary. Oh, by the way, we changed 2 guidelines and now you no longer qualify to open. So with some speed, I sent a letter out to the town saying we're not going to open on September 8th. So since September 8th, we've been doing a lot of continued internal discussions, conversations with the Public Education Department, and we got approval, but it is now based upon social distance. Again, that's 6 foot from the nearest neighbor, but also it's based upon school roster. So if you can envision, I'll do an easy one. Say you were at Country Club Elementary, 500 kids. The state will allow us to bring back 250. And so we will then present a more detailed plan. How do you get 250 kids into Country Club?
Right.
And it goes a little bit further. Then the state also said, but we want to have a new air filtration system called a MERV 13. All of our equipment runs on a MERV 8. And so the MERVs are those multiple layers of cloth that filters out dust and particle. And so we did some quick investigations of our systems. We were able to procure a MERV 13 filter that actually adapts to our system. That was a great concern early on because, our systems are built, if you can envision a rack. A rack is what they sit in.
Right.
And most of the MERV filters that we were shopping for early had a 2-inch rack, and ours has a 1-inch rack. And so we're able to figure out how to do that.
Interesting. I kind of picture that maybe as a home furnace, maybe, Dr. Schmidt, and having to replace our furnace filters, but certainly on a much grander scale. But that's what I kind of visualize when you describe it that way.
Yes, and that's exactly right. People either, some people have swamp coolers or air filter things, and it is that thing that you replace about 4 times a year.
Right, and these are certainly, I guess, maybe higher quality, maybe higher filtration than rated for your schools. That's the difference between an 8 and a 13?
Absolutely. They're just a higher density of material that it makes it harder for, again, particulates to go through. So
right.
It really does filter out the air. And then in addition, as part of our promise to get back into school. We'll also be doing just some increased airflow. And so if you can envision us opening up the
Right.
dampers in the early morning and maybe the late afternoon to just accelerate the replacement or displacement of air. So all of those are good things.
Very good. And then you've got, 3 options, I guess, for folks then as you return to learn as part of this plan?
Yes, and so I thank you for sharing that. And that is that some students, so I'm going to talk about pre-K through 5.
Right.
I'll talk about grades 6 through 12 later, but this for pre-K through 5, a number of our students, probably about 2,200, will continue to learn from home for the rest of the first semester. But we have reached out to those kids that, when we surveyed the community, said that they wanted to return, so it's about 2,100.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to bring those kids back under 2 different models. I have 10 elementaries and I have 2 pre-K academies. So I'll talk about the elementary schools. 7 of the elementary schools, it just worked out mathematically that they could bring back their kindergarten through 5 in a hybrid model 4 days a week with a Monday virtual from home. And I'll contrast that with 3 of my elementaries. I'm looking at Country Club, Ladera, and Mesa Verde. They had more than 50% of their kids want to return to school. And so to make the math work, in some classes, not all kids get to come back that day. And so envision, for example, a school that maybe all the kindergartners through 2nd grade that want to come back at 50%, but grades 3 through 5, there's more than 50%. And so those kids maybe would be placed on an AB model and come to school twice a week instead of 4 times a week. Again, with the time at home being a at-home learning model. So it depends upon what your school's roster and roster capacity was. And so all of the parents who selected the at-school model should have been contacted by now, and they would know if they're on the 4-day-a-week or the 2-day-a-week model. So we're excited to have kids back, and obviously we're going to continue to ask the public department what will it take to bring as many kids back as want to return as compared to the 50% roster.
Understood. And that's an ongoing conversation, really, isn't it, Dr. Schmidt? Because I know they're keeping an eye on numbers. We talked to Deputy Secretary Dr. Gwen Pereira-Warneman on our COVID-19 program on Monday, and she was kind of talking about that if these rules could be changed and things would get shut down again. And she mentioned to us that wouldn't be a very immediate decision. It kind of goes on a 2-week kind of rolling average, looking at cases and things like that. So it sounds like the state public education department would try to give school districts some very long notice if there were to be any changes beyond this plan. Is that your understanding?
Yes. Yeah, and that is my understanding, is that we have the belief when we open that they won't close us down, but between September and October 13th, we need to have my Farmington families continue to show good health practices and just help me get my kids or our kids back in school by making good choices.
Very true. And that leads us to another topic this morning, Dr. Schmidt, and that is supporting your students emotionally and socially, because I think a lot of parents and even students are maybe missing that socialness of going to school and seeing their friends and seeing their teachers. And so the district is doing some other additional things for that, and that's worthy of note, I think.
Yes, and I thank you for that, because there is a lot of conversation going on in Farmington, in the state of New Mexico, nationally around the country, all kinds of conversations are going not only to what are the best ways to support students, when they are home, isolated, learning from home, but also support teachers and staff as well. It's been a long time since people have connected other than through the Zoom that you and I are doing right now. So it is incumbent upon, I think, not only the school, but the community. And so I've reached out to City Manager Rob Mays and say that, this is a partnership. We've reached out to Mike Mestis and others from San Juan County. It's something bigger than the school, just making sure that our kids and the staff members are supported. So we really are, trying to do some critical outreach, and we'll be posting some additional resources on our website as we continue to learn from home. But what our high school kids and others know, that there is a phone app called Say Something. And I think that is our message to the community. If you hear or see or observe or learn of something, it is a chance to help us provide the social emotional support that we think our kids are going to need, as we go on, because we've already said I've got probably 2,200 elementary kids that will continue to choose at-home learning. That means I've got over 5,000 middle and high school kids continuing to learn from home.
Right.
And we just need to make sure as a community and as a school system, we are doing all we can to care for our kids and be watching to see that they are okay for themselves.
Indeed. And if I remember correctly, our conversations about that app, Dr. Schmidt, that See Something, Say Something app is an anonymous kind of reporting app that people can use that anonymously?
Yes, and I thank you for that, because you have a great memory, that it is important that kids understand that this can be used with a sense of confidentiality, that when they call in, it goes into a caring call center that will reach back to the schools, but just even to talk to somebody, I think
right.
is important, and so that opportunity is available. But also I would say that many students have a caring adult that they knew from back when we were actually going to school. It is okay to reach out to adults. It's okay to talk to your friends. And so we would want kids to make sure that we care for them. We're going to get them back in school. And just, if you're lonely, if you're feeling sad, you have a friend.
Good point. And you're also adding some social workers to your schools, and of course the school counselors are still there as well for other more immediate needs and face-to-face needs too?
Yeah, it's interesting. When kids were sent home last March, that began an immediate conversation about what more can a system do. And I'm very pleased to say that every school has a counselor, and we were trying to flood additional social, emotional, behavioral people to help as well. So we have added 5 more social workers. I think there's a total of 9 now that are being shared between elementaries and middle schools. We also have a number of people who, I'll give the example, we have at least 8 Native American youth advisors whose daily task is to call and connect with kids to make sure that they're out there and they're okay. So really, the district has really tried to up the importance of social emotional support by adding additional staff. And that will be a conversation that will continue as we learn about the need for additional support through the data that we collect.
Very good. Now I want to ask you too, you mentioned the older students and their plans, and so I kind of wanted to ask you a little bit about that, Dr. Schmidt, and then we can talk a little bit about some of the legislative committees that you've been presenting to. But for the older grades, which I think we heard from Dr. Pereira-Warnement earlier this week about, that's a little bit more difficult because those students don't tend to stick with their own cohorts as they're spending the day at school, they're switching to different classes and things like that. So the idea of trying to keep kids in their own pods, if you will, is maybe a little more complicated when we talk about high school kids.
Yes, and that's a great insight on your part. The dynamic between elementary, middle, and high school changes because elementary kids tend to be in a class cohort and in a classroom for more portions of the day. Middle school and high school, they're pretty mobile. They're moving all about the building.
Right.
And so as Farmington prepares our plan to return to learn for middle and high, we are trying to understand, how can we safely move kids about the building? And as you say, if the same elementary rules apply to high school, it gets a little bit more tricky when you try to get roster capacity at 50%. So what we think will happen in our conversations with people like Dr. Warnament and certainly Secretary Stewart is that there will be a gradual release, and probably middle school, if not sometime in the third week of October. We're hoping at least by the end of October that the state will see the value of the plan that we'll be submitting and allow our kids to return. Now, obviously, we're going to say we want a faster back to school than that, but the state is really studying the COVID not only in New Mexico but all around the country, and I'm seeing concern across states in the nation that we're seeing a gradual increase in COVID because they talk about once people get as the temperature cools and people are in maybe a more confined area, we might see more of a COVID return. The positive aspect is we're looking at a model that we are taking from Rio Rancho. I've talked to Superintendent Cleveland from Rio Rancho. They've actually been open for 2 weeks using the model that we are proposing, and that they've only seen 2 cases of student COVID that were isolated and caught early, and that's a promising sign. If we are vigilant, use the models, catch it when it happens, and we just get to keep going. So we're hoping that the middle school will get the next call back, and then, we certainly want to give high school kids their opportunity. So we will continue to say we have a plan, we think it'll work, allow us to try it, and let's bring some kids back.
Very exciting, but it sounds like then that certainly there's a lot of conversations about that and about that possibility happening at the state level and at the Farmington local level for your district and other districts as well. So this is something that probably will be happening sooner than later, I guess, if I had to cross my fingers and hope.
Yes, and it really is an interesting question because I know that Central Consolidated was given the go-ahead to open before we were. I know that Aztec is currently open with an AB model. Central is looking at it. So there's really a lot of good conversation going in the Four Corners as school systems are rolling out different kinds of return to learn models. And so that might be one of the curiosities for our community as they say, well, your plan looks a little different in Central, which looks a little different in Aztec. And so I do appreciate the fact that the Public Education Department seems to be open to giving a little bit more local flexibility or innovation or an opportunity to be different to meet as much of the local need as we can. And we're hoping that, that same conversation will work its way into the middle and eventually the high school to again, bring as many kids back, because what we're finding, Scott, is kids want to come back to school in greater numbers than 50%. And so then you have to be a little bit more creative in how do you get kids back.
Right, true. Well, and I think maybe parents want kids to go back too, maybe a little bit as well. But let me ask you a bit about this other presentation to the Legislative Education Study Committee on kind of career education and things along that line, Dr. Schmidt, and talk to us a little bit about that as we look beyond COVID, as you know, kids still need an education, they still need to graduate, they still need to go out and get jobs, and so I think this talks a little bit about what that job market might look like here in San Juan County in the years to come.
Yes, and so a couple of different things, and good for Farmington and the partnerships that we're building along the way, because increasingly the state and the nation is interested in how is Farmington able to do things that some people either haven't thought through well enough or haven't tried, but Farmington as a school system received an invitation from the Legislative Education Study Committee. So call that a big deal. The LESC tries to study about what are current or promising practices that the legislature might support if and when money rolls around in the spring. And so for our community, we were invited to talk about the career and technical education, the use of money. The legislature last year, as you recall, two things happened. One, at the federal level, federal government approved Carl Perkins 5, which is the fifth. You know, they do this every 5 years. So Carl Perkins 5, the fifth time that they have done this, federal support for career and technical education. The state matched some of the federal monies to provide additional revenue to support our career and technical education programs. And so, as it would not surprise our community to know that we are very actively involved in things like power and energy. We have health occupations. You know, we're very interested in welding. There's some industrial technology. So think about programming, robotics, and things like that. You know, we're trying to anticipate the marketplace in the future. But there's also other marketplaces that Farmington is interested in, and that is outdoor recreation and perhaps the attraction of companies that would support outdoor rec. That's an interest of Farmington's. You know, we continue to say, where might our future teachers come? So all of those different career tech programs are helped through funding from the career and technical education, as well as next generation career and technical education monies. And so a lot of positive partnerships with the state, and the state again has reached out to Farmington and say, you seem to be using the money well, you're having lots of completers, you know, give us a chance to understand what you're doing. And so when we go back and ask for more money, or at least continued funding, that Farmington's efforts to grow a workforce for the future will continue to be available to our kids. And so that was one thing, even as other kinds of things are going on that the state is interested. Many of your listeners, Scott, will know the name of Secretary Elizabeth Groginski. She's from the Early Childhood Development, which is different than the public education department, but there's a growing movement to do more to support early childhood education. So as people in our community, they would recognize the name Barb Tedrow locally. So we have a growing partnership with the early childhood daycare providers. We have a growing partnership with the Boys and Girls Club. When I want to say thanks for buying all that barbecue sauce, Scott, to support the Boys and Girls Club.
Last Friday, that's right.
Last Friday. So, but we have probably, according to Secretary Groginski, the best model of a community partnership in trying to make early child care available, daycare available, latchkey programs. You know, we are the model of the state. So again, I thank all of our community partners that make early childhood daycare and those things possible, and that in turn gives Farmington a chance to talk about what we're doing to the rest of the state. So once again, I've been invited to speak on behalf of Farmington and what we're trying to do in our outreach to latchkey and daycare to make sure that our kids are continuing to, you know, find a safe place to be, and you know, good for daycare centers, Scott, because they now all have internet, and the many kids that would normally be in school that are at home learning, that are at daycare centers, have the capacity to learn school while they're at their daycare centers. So it's a great model, and Barb Tedrow continues to show good leadership in trying to build those partnerships with our 5 private daycare providers in town.
Right. Very good. And of course, I know the successes of Farmington schools, your students, your staff, your faculty, continues to get noticed at the state and national level. There's some other recognition and influence that maybe the district has been able to have in those places, and we can kind of wrap up our conversation this morning, giving a little bit of kudos for that.
Yes, and thank you for that, because we are attracting national attention, and there is a group called...
In a good way. National attention in a good way.
In a good way,
yes, sir.
Yeah, I remember about 3 years ago, and we were not a good place to live or something, but that is not true. Farmington's a great place, and the fact that we're getting national recognition, they will be publishing an online case study about how Farmington has used its capacity to build systems, and systems are how we train teachers on our Monday early releases, or how we work with principals to build leadership capacity. So it really is a nice story that will be coming out about Farmington at the national level. And also our community will be pleased to know that we are looked at as a promising practice in working with our Native American kids. The graduation rates, the proficiencies in reading and math of our Native American kids are surpassing those in New Mexico and the country. And so the Department of Education gave us a call last week to wonder aloud how we're doing that, with the hope to visit in Washington, D.C. when people travel again. But I want our community to feel good. I want our staff and kids to feel good that we continue to do things that outshine. They offer beacons of hope for other schools. And then we will continue, even in a virtual world, to provide a high-quality education that attracts both the state and the nation.
Well, very exciting, Dr. Schmidt. Congratulations again to you, your staff, and of course the teachers and students that are also doing a lot of the work as well to get this type of recognition. We are out of time this morning, as always happens to us, but I do appreciate you chatting with me this morning, giving our listeners and viewers kind of an overview of what's going on and kind of a roadmap for what to watch for in the future. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, and to all our listeners, go get your flu shot.
Very good advice. That's very true. Dr. Eugene Schmidt, the Superintendent of Schools with the Farmington School District, my guest here on KSJE. Back with more, everyone, in just a moment.